We're moving up Vicki Dunn's talk. Vicki's going to talk on opportunities for original equipment manufacturers in the gas value chain.
All right, well, I'll try. So I'm Vicki Dunn. I have about 35 years of experience driving technical organizations to be more market-driven, helping them drive strategic marketing and analytics-based decisions to drive their business strategy. Have an engineering degree, started out at Ericsson, the Swedish telecommunications giant. Then I worked at Compaq when we were building the whole computer industry from scratch. Then 20 years at Shell, GE Oil and Gas, Chief Marketing Officer for the drilling and surface business at GE Oil and Gas. And I've been doing consulting ever since. So I help companies really understand how to understand the key trends, drivers in the market that are going to help shape and drive the business going forward and drive growth of the business. So I do have a little bit of OEM experience. When I was at Shell for all those years, I mean, I was an operator side, and I wanted to get equipment experience. I was the global marketing director for Shell Global Solutions, and so we are the technology arm of the group. So we had all of the technology sitting in one place, and our go-to-market was basically, let's put a catalog together of these thousands of things, these widgets, and our go-to-market was, here's a catalog and let me know if there's anything you're interested in. And so we completely changed our whole go-to-market and got much more strategic. We created these 10 integrated offerings that were based on customer needs, so big themes like asset integrity, energy efficiency, energy management, maintenance and reliability, big themes that were affecting oil and gas, petrochemical refining companies. And so we grew the business from $250 million to $3.6 billion in 5 years. Similarly, when I joined GE Oil and Gas, it was the same thing. There was a lot of stuff, and we weren't really thinking about the market strategically. We weren't thinking about how do I go to market and think horizontally across the market. I mean, GE, like a lot of businesses, very vertically. They come in and they have a product line, and it's all about that product line, and not necessarily thinking across different product lines to say, how can we go to market as one GE in that case, and be a much bigger presence in that market. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that I did at GE, and actually were some of the precursors to some of the stuff that you guys already heard about from some of the small scale LNG and CNG capabilities. So there are certainly lots of opportunities for OEMs in the small and mid-scale LNG projects. There's lots of opportunities, but again, it's important that you sort of think across your market, because where the small scale and mid scale LNG projects, that's the place that's growing right now. We've already heard, right? Large scale LNG projects are oversupplied. The opportunity is in the small and mid-size. ADI estimates that in the small to mid-scale LNG market's about $6.6 billion in 2015, and about $10.7 billion for the regas market. So it is a sizable market, and it is slightly declining, but not declining as much as large-scale LNG. And so the opportunity really is to focus on that. And obviously, you guys have heard that from multiple presentations so far. That's the opportunity in the near term. But when you think about that range of product offerings, there are so many different products that are going to come from so many different OEMs to meet that project demand. And again, I would just encourage you to sort of think laterally and horizontally across the business, and how can you potentially partner with other companies to provide a more integrated solution. For example, at GE, when I joined, we had compressor technology, we had storage capacity, we had people that we just acquired a company in Austin that could actually do the dispensing of CNG, and they were selling all three of those individually. And I said, well, hey, why don't we create an integrated offer? And we just sort of called it CNG in a box and LNG in a box, and grew a business without doing any R&D. It was basically just packaging up technology we already had, but going to market in a different way, because our gas compression business was not focused on oil and gas. They were focused just on sort of power generation and that sort of thing. So getting them to even think about oil and gas was a change, but we grew that business substantially from zero to quite a big business in a short amount of time, and we were able to focus on LNG for transportation, and really packaged it up in a simple box, a skid that could be pretty much just almost drop shipped into various locations to help drive that, enable that whole LNG for transportation. obviously, it's all about cutting costs and driving efficiency. That's what our customers, are asking for. And part of that efficiency and cutting of costs has got to come from standardization and developing best-in-class, but not necessarily over-engineered products. When I was at Compaq, one of the founders, they were engineers from TI, and we used to actually gold plate the connectors, literally put gold plate on them, because that's what was driven, that's how we got to the quality levels that we wanted. The Q in Compaq stood for quality. But we sort of, as Dell was nipping at our heels in Austin and had a completely different disruptive business model going direct to the customer, we were still over here over-engineering the connectors and having gold-plated connectors. Meanwhile, they're taking share from us and eventually overtook us as the #1 PC manufacturer in the world. And so you can't over-engineer anything. That was a long time ago, but still companies are doing that today. You've got to really be fit for purpose. And so a lot of the opportunity is to get that standardization because cost overruns are big. I mean, there's a lot of projects. You heard earlier that Gorgon's like 300% over budget. These big mega projects are really hard to run and to do it effectively. At Shell, our Qatar GTL project was $20 billion and multiple years over budget. And it's hard to get those big projects done. So we've got to figure out ways to collaborate across the value chain and look for ways to streamline and do things more effectively and efficiently. I mean, there's talk of open standards, if you will, for some of this big project work. I know, I think it was the Isthmus project. Isthmus? Thank you. That project was, they're looking at trying to combine some construction schedules and things like that and get things, collaborating across different parts of the value chain. And that's one way that's going to help, manage some of those huge capital costs because, I mean, we've heard that the smaller projects are less capital intensive, they're easier to manage. These big projects need a lot more collaboration if they're going to be effective. So some of the things that we can do, to standardize and modularize, it's really going to drive that scale and that cost reduction. Using standard equipment, making sure that we're really only focused on customizing those things that are truly mission critical. I mean, there's so many parts of the value chain that don't have to be customized. And we have a few examples here around some of the production facilities or even the helicopter pads. Even things like HS&E standard practices and things like that. Every operator, every project doesn't have to come up with all of its own sort of HSE protocols and such. There are a lot of things that we can do standard across the piece and not feel like we have to start from scratch every time. And even for like the FPSOs and with Shell's Prelude project, I mean, it started out to be extremely customized, and over the course of realizing that was going to be a very difficult thing for us to deliver on time and on budget, having just learned from the Qatar project, it became much more modularized and a bit more standardized. It's a huge, complex piece of machinery, billions of parts of machinery, but trying to get where we can modularize and standardize, that was the approach we were trying to take. So looking to try to standardize, whether it's offshore or onshore. Offshore projects are obviously multiple years and hundreds of millions, and onshore we can do we can drill a well in the period of a few months and for $5-6 million. But regardless, it's the same process and principles that we need to be much more standard in our process and standard in how we approach the technology and the solution. We all know, I don't know how familiar people are with onshore in this space, but obviously the whole unconventional space, it's a manufacturing process. It has to have a manufacturing mindset. Because we're drilling thousands of wells every day across the U.S. and across the world, but obviously heavily in the U.S. And it's a manufacturing mindset. It has to be one where you just drill, and it's about efficiency and cutting cost. And once you drill, it's all about the reservoir modeling, obviously making sure you know where to drill in that shale. But really, the rest of it is just a logistics play of manufacturing. When the sand gets there, when the water gets there, when the chemicals get there, when you need the right kinds of teams there. And so driving that sort of standard process and taking more of a manufacturing mindset really has enabled unconventionals, even in this downturn, to continue to be able to make money in most of the shale plays. I don't think, we're going to see those prices like the barrels, $100 barrel in oil anytime soon. So it's a new market. I mean, the unconventional operators have figured out that this is, 40, 50, 60, it is going to be the new normal. So I better figure out how to make money at that kind of level. And they have, because they've cut costs, they've driven efficiency, they've automated. It's all about automation, right? It's all about the smarts, and we'll talk a little bit about, obviously, the industrial Internet of Things. But that's such a big driver for driving that efficiency, and it's the only way that unconventional resources in a lot of places, can be effective, is if we drive out that cost through standardized processes and that manufacturing mindset. So a lot of OEMs really are filling out their portfolio because they want to be able to be seen as, that sort of one-stop shop for whatever specific need that you have. And in this case, we've just highlighted, the engineered pump space. And there's so many different types of pumps, screw pumps and overhung and submersible. There's all these different kinds of pumps, and every pump has a specific, every application requires a specific type of pump. But companies like SPX have really, taken over a significant amount of share because they have a full line of pumps. And it enables them to be able to provide a more integrated solution to whatever that customer's needs are, or whatever application they have a solution. And that's just hugely valuable for a lot of companies who are trying to standardize their procurement processes, not deal with so many different types of vendors. I was working with a client who was up against SPX, and it was tough because they really have, through acquisitions and through their own organic development, they have absolutely taken over a market space where they've got a capability and an asset for any application that an operator might have. So the other key messages around aftermarket, and the support throughout the entire life cycle that is so critical. And we all know that aftermarket margins are a whole lot higher than original equipment. And interestingly, though, a lot of companies didn't care about the aftermarket for years. In fact, the company I was just talking about that was trying to regain some market presence against SPX, for years they had just given away their aftermarket, let a whole cottage industry build up around them. The people that managed all the spare parts, did all the service and the repairs. And so one of the things we said from a strategic perspective was you ought to try to grab some of that aftermarket back, because that's where the margin is. And it evens out your business. If the OE equipment's sort of lumpy, the aftermarket, it's everybody's familiar with the software as a service. You just pay $9.99 a month for that software, and so as a company, you're going to have a guaranteed revenue of $9.99 a month. And increasingly, that's the direction that companies are starting to go. It's less about the equipment. The equipment almost becomes a giveaway. It's to get the aftermarket. Companies like GE, learned that a long time ago. In the aviation business, they would spend, hundreds of millions of dollars developing a jet engine and almost essentially give it away to get that 30-year annuity stream, because there was so much margin and revenue to be made on the service side that it was almost worth giving the hardware away. And so it's the same thing in our space. You've got to consider aftermarket and the service side of the business when you're developing the business case for that new product, because a lot of times the service capability will make a lot more than the original equipment. So thinking that through as part of the business case is an important part of that R&D decision process. And you can see, the margin is pretty significantly much higher on the service side. And interestingly, too, even as the market has declined for these engineered pumps from, say, 9.8 to 8.6 between 14 and 15, you can see that the aftermarket services, maintain their percent of that split. So it's actually become a larger percentage of the overall split. So it is the opportunity for us, because companies, look, they want their equipment to last as long as possible. And so if you can provide them with original equipment service, knowing that you're going to be able to maintain it, and you're not worried about trying to sell the next pump because you're getting the revenue from the service, it's okay for that pump to last longer. And then you have that deeper relationship with the client, and they see you as obviously value adding to their business. And so really thinking through the aftermarket piece as a part of that overall business case is really essential. So then the industrial Internet of Things, obviously everyone here is very familiar with that and what it means. It's all about automation and smarter equipment, adding smarts to what otherwise would have sort of been dumb iron. I know when I started working at GE, we had the pressure control equipment, and I'm an engineer, right? But our engineers thought it was the best dumb iron that you could possibly have, and you try to say, well, it's just kind of pressure control. It's just sort of valves, and it just sort of you just control pressure with it. So what could we do to add more value to that piece of hunk of iron? And so really trying to get folks to think differently about how we can add some smarts to it so that we can get the data we need to actually be able to drive more efficiency and drive cost out and create more value for our customers. So companies like GE, Emerson, Honeywell, all very well known in the automation space and in the industrial space. So they're all working through ways to, again, looking horizontally across the market, saying who could I partner with to provide a more integrated solution. They're all partnering with different kind of companies to expand their capability so that they then offer a more integrated solution to key customers. So GE with Technip, for example, and Meridium, so that they can then go to a RAS gas and offer a much more robust solution. And really, it's about creating that stickiness with the customers, because once you're providing data and insights to them on the hardware, then they are more inclined to stay with you because you've got the data that's making their operations more efficient. Actually, similar to the service is more important than the equipment, the data is more important than anything else. That's where the value is. The value is in the data that we can create and provide to customers so that they can run their operations more efficiently. So, we've all seen this before on that technology maturity. Back in the 90s, it was all about SCADA systems. And, everybody had to have a SCADA system. Didn't matter that they were hard to use, and it didn't matter that the data actually didn't get into the hands of the people that actually needed to make decisions, but we had SCADA systems, and sometimes it was helpful. And so, we were able to make some better decisions sometimes. But then, with the decreasing cost of sensors and controls and communications, then we start to, be able to actually automate a lot more things and actually get a lot more data and have that data communicated to the people that actually need it. So get it out of the SCADA system that's sitting in some central office somewhere and miles from where the person's actually trying to operate the equipment, and started to get into the hands of the people that, kind of needed it. And so it was about reducing downtime. So it was moving from just being sort of, very reactive to a little bit more proactive, where we could start to get some data into the hands of the people that could make decisions more quickly. And obviously where we want to get to, and this is, again, you guys know this as well as anybody, we want to get to where it's predictive analytics. So we actually are seeing what's happening. A machine's going to be able to see a trend long before human eyeballs are going to be able to see a trend in the data. So being able to get that analytics, drive that efficiency by making sure that we've got the data in the hands of the people that actually need it to make real-time decisions, or as real-time as possible. Similar example from back to the GE Aviation. So they had gone to the big service model, was about the 30-year annuity. Well, then continuing to move that forward, they then got to a point where they had so many sensors on that jet engine and a big control room set up that they tracked that whole engine throughout the whole flight, and they knew exactly what part needed to be touched, tweaked, replaced. Instead of it just being time-based, okay, this part's had 1,000 hours of use or 10 hours of use or whatever, we've got to replace it. No, let's actually just replace the ones based on the data that tells us this is the one that needs to be replaced. And it could be one that hasn't met its normal, sort of operating parameters, so you normally wouldn't even have put it on that maintenance schedule. But it's the one that needs to be replaced. So it's that real-time tracking throughout the whole flight. When it lands at that next location, there's people there ready to do just those 2 or 3 things or 10 things or whatever it is, but just the things that are needed to fix that engine to get it back on in flight. Not just time-based maintenance where you might be replacing perfectly good parts and missing ones that actually could be really important. And given it's a jet engine, that's probably kind of important to know. So, so it's really about moving from reactive to proactive to eventually, it's all about predictive analytics. And you guys may or may not be aware. I mean, you've probably seen some of GE's ads around being the digital industrial company, trying to move that mindset from, yes, of course, people know GE is this big industrial company, but actually trying to be a digital industrial company. And it's about looking at the whole digital ecosystem too, and all of those parts, all that original equipment. How do you bring it all together into one ecosystem with intelligence and analytics to make the whole system work better? Companies are saying, look, I want to increase efficiency, I got to lower cost, I got to drive operational excellence. So they're increasingly being willing to pay companies for uptime, pay per performance contracts, which again is just the next evolution on our journey from selling a piece of hardware to selling hardware and service to now it's all about pay for performance. And so for an example is GE. I know there's a lot of GE examples, but they have, we had started talking about this, learning from the aviation side, where they quit selling, even hardware or service. It was really, GE was selling pounds of thrust. And so if you're depending on how much thrust that engine got, that's what they got paid on, because they had all the data and the analytics to be able to know how much thrust was actually being delivered to that customer. So using that same model, GE is now basically, they own the blowout preventers on those drill ships that are being built. And they used to sell them. We used to sell them. And I was in Korea a lot trying to market and sell blowout preventers to the Korean drill ship manufacturers. And eventually we said, hey, this is an opportunity for us to just really do what works for the customer. They're not having to be out that CapEx. We know we can do a better job of managing and reading that data and understanding the analytics that it's telling us. So we'll keep that blow-up preventer up and running. And it gives us an opportunity to stay really, really, really close with our customers. Because it's all about the data. Again, the value is in the data. So now GE has actually kept that data. They own it because they own the equipment. Instead of having to get into a conversation with the customer about who owns the data, well, GE owns the data, and that's where the value is, because now they can continually make improvements to the hardware based on that data and those analytics. So they can constantly tweak and and integrate some of those learnings into the R&D cycle. And we talk about it shifts the CapEx to the vendor. It's pay for performance. It's about being industrial internet enabled. Again, it's all about sensors and automation and controls. And then again, accelerates that learning curve so that you get those learnings back into the R&D cycle more quickly. So really, that was the key messages around looking for small and mid-scale LNG opportunities. It's all about collaboration across the market and across the value chain. Really, it's about aftermarket services and how do you move to more of a pay for performance kind of model using data and analytics, and helping get closer and more sticky with your customer, so that as they're developing their piece of the solution, you're developing your piece of the solution, and together you get to a point where it's almost sort of seamless, and they can't kind of imagine not working with you in the future, because you know their business as well as they do, almost, because you've got data and analytics to help inform some of those strategic decisions. I'll open up for any questions.
Questions? Yeah.
Are any of the BOPs actually in service?
No.
Or there will be vessels in the yard?
I think so. I mean, I don't know for sure. I haven't spoken to them recently, but it's absolutely. It took. Well, I know we started talking about it quite a few years ago. It took a while for GE to come on board and for the customer to come on board, because it was such a different concept and mindset that had to happen. Yes?
Yeah, how do you convince the customer that this all-in approach is adding value versus you're just being an expensive bank so he doesn't have to invest capital?
Well, I mean, they want to move their expenses from CapEx to OpEx. So if you can relieve them of that CapEx, they're happy to do it. Because they can handle OpEx much easier than they can handle CapEx, because the CapEx is spikier, the OpEx they can plan for. So that was a big part of the conversation, was how do we move it from being a CapEx expense to just part of your operating expense.
See, I watch GE, the technology planning very carefully. This automation side of the business, they claim to be about $300 billion business, right? Yeah, so they have created, see, the reason GE got, and correct me if I'm wrong, GE got into the business of oil and gas is because natural gas prices were around, over $10. Okay, I'm talking about, early 2000s. So they bought this company in oil and gas for $1 billion in Spain, in Italy, and now it's a $20 billion business.
Well, the first business was Vetco Gray.
Yeah, right.
That was the first oil and gas business, because
And so now they have split this up completely, and they said that automation is fairly sizable business. And that's why this Internet of Things and predictive analytics, you have a Predictive platform.
Yep.
They keep changing it completely. But the point I'm trying to make is a lot of this technology is talking about preventive maintenance to predictive maintenance. And they have even gone to active maintenance, where GE aircraft engine turbines is a good example of it. Now, it's all documented. What's happening now, I think, is taking all those pieces, customizing it to the customer's need to move, to help in the OpEx area. So, because the processing is available now. And I think it's important to for each one of us who are helping these operators to kind of identify that value, that's coming from digital technology. And it's not happening. We get the articles there. Everybody is trying one-off, as opposed to everybody's talking big.
Yeah.
Very little is happening.
Oh yeah. I mean, Accenture said a couple years ago it was going to be a $30 billion market just in sort of sensors and controls just a couple years ago. So, yeah, I mean, there's numbers all over the place, and some of it is still early days for sure. I mean, this is going to take a while for this to become part of in a few years we won't remember when we didn't have all of this, automation and all this capability. But the value is there. People are starting to see, even a 1% improvement in certain areas can have huge impact on, the bottom line. So it does take a little bit of time, because it's not just that one piece. There's a lot of other stuff that goes around it that you have to kind of work through the system and get all of those other pieces to change to where they are all more automated. And because if you just automate one piece of equipment, that doesn't help that much if there's the piece right next to it doesn't have any smarts next to it. So it will take a while for that smarting of all that hardware, to pull through the system. But it'll be there. We know that. We know the increase in efficiency and productivity we had when I was at Compaq, just with the introduction of the PC back into the corporate world, and how we could automate processes. So, it'll be there. It's just, it does take a little bit of time. It's pretty early days of this whole digitization of, the industrial space. Some people have been in it longer than others, but it's still pretty early days. But we know the value is there in a lot of cases already. But it is about making sure that you've looked at it from an ecosystem perspective, because again, it's like the weakest link in the chain. Well, if there's one that's not automated and everything around it is, then that's going to provide some.
It's a data point. What's interesting is that oil and gas industry is in the top 5 categories of industries which can benefit immensely from analytics.
But we're also, somebody mentioned earlier about being serial number one. We still have a mindset of nobody wants to be serial number one. So some of that even applies in, some of the automation and the digitization space. But, it'll happen. It is happening now. And, NOV's got smart pipe. It's so easy now to add sensors and capabilities to just about any piece of equipment. It'll happen. It just takes a little bit of time.
Okay, any more questions? With that, please thank Vicki.
Thank you.
So much.